A white woman with her twin babies thought she was safe on the frontier, until the day the Comanche chief's wife took everything from her. But what happened next would reveal a truth no one expected. Thank you so much for watching and for all your comments. Let me know at the end if you like the story, and where you're watching from and why you're following this. Sarah Miller clutched her twin babies tightly against her chest as the wagon rattled along the dusty Texas trail. Her husband Thomas had been gone for 3 months now, leaving their small homestead to trade furs in Santa Fe. The summer heat beat down mercilessly, causing beads of sweat to form on her brow as she continued her journey to visit her sister in Fort Davis. "Just a few more hours, my darlings," she whispered to the sleeping infants. "Aunt Martha will be so happy to see you both." The 6-month-old twins, Emma and Elijah, were her world, especially with Thomas away. The trail stretched before her, winding through tall grass and scattered mesquite trees. In the distance, the Davis Mountains loomed, their silhouettes promising safety and family. But safety was never guaranteed in the West Texas frontier of 1868. The first indication of trouble came when her horse suddenly stopped, ears pricking forward nervously. Sarah's heart began to pound as she scanned the horizon. The sound of hoofbeats approached rapidly from behind a nearby ridge. "Please, Lord," she prayed, "keep us safe." Within moments, 6 Comanche warriors appeared, their faces painted for war, feathers adorning their long black hair. Sarah froze, knowing that any sudden movement might provoke them. The leader, distinguished by the eagle feathers in his headdress, approached her wagon. "I mean no harm," Sarah said, her voice trembling despite her attempt at courage. "Please, I have children." The warrior studied her with dark, unflinching eyes. He spoke in Comanche to his companions, who laughed harshly. Sarah couldn't understand their words, but their intent became clear when they surrounded her wagon. "Please," she begged, "we have nothing of value." The leader gestured for her to step down from the wagon. When she hesitated, he reached up and firmly grasped her arm, pulling her down. The twins began to cry, their wails cutting through the tense air. "My babies," Sarah cried, reaching for them. But 2 warriors already had the infants in their arms, examining them with curiosity. The leader spoke again, and Sarah was bound with leather straps, her wrists secured tightly behind her back. They placed her on a horse, and one warrior carefully handed the twins to her, allowing her to hold them against her chest despite her bindings. As they rode away from her abandoned wagon, Sarah's mind raced with stories she'd heard of captives taken by Comanche raiders. Some were tortured, some killed, some adopted into the tribe. What fate awaited her and her children? The twins, exhausted from crying, eventually fell asleep against her, unaware of the danger surrounding them. They traveled for hours, the landscape changing as they moved deeper into Comanche territory. When night fell, they made camp beneath a cluster of cottonwood trees near a small creek. Sarah was given water and a piece of dried meat, which she struggled to eat with her hands bound. "Why are you doing this?" she asked the warrior who brought her food, knowing he probably didn't understand English. "Where are you taking us?" The man simply looked at her, then glanced at the twins. He spoke a single word in Comanche before walking away. That night, as Sarah lay on a buffalo hide under the stars, her babies nestled beside her, she wept silently. Her thoughts turned to Thomas, who would return to an empty homestead with no idea what had happened to his family. Would he search for them? Would he ever find them? Or was this the beginning of a new life, one she had never imagined and deeply feared? Morning came with no mercy for her aching body and troubled mind. The warriors broke camp quickly, and soon they were traveling again. By midday, Sarah caught sight of smoke rising from multiple fires in the distance. They were approaching a Comanche village. As they rode into the encampment, curious eyes fell upon the white woman and her twin babies. Children ran alongside the horses, pointing and chattering excitedly. Women emerged from teepees, their faces showing a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. The leader dismounted and spoke to an older man who appeared to be a respected elder. There was much discussion, with occasional glances toward Sarah. Finally, a decision seemed to be reached. Sarah was helped down from the horse and led toward a large teepee adorned with painted symbols of what appeared to be hunting scenes. Inside sat a woman of striking appearance. Her long black hair was braided with colorful beads, and her dress was elaborately decorated with intricate beadwork. Her face, though beautiful, held no warmth as she regarded Sarah and the twins. This, Sarah realized with growing dread, was the wife of the chief. The woman stood and circled Sarah slowly, examining her from head to toe. She reached out and touched one of the twins' pale blonde hair, so different from Comanche children. Then, with a sudden movement that startled Sarah, she barked an order to the warriors who had escorted her. Sarah was pushed to her knees. The twins still clutched protectively against her. The chief's wife spoke again, her tone harsh and commanding. 2 Comanche women appeared and took the babies from Sarah's arms despite her desperate protests. "No, please, don't take my children," Sarah screamed, struggling against her restraints. The chief's wife slapped her hard across the face, silencing her cries. Through tears, Sarah watched as her babies were carried away, their frightened wails echoing in her ears long after they disappeared from sight. The next morning, Sarah awoke in a small teepee where she had been placed after her children were taken. Her face still stung from the chief's wife's slap, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the anguish of separation from her twins. She had spent the night in restless agony, her mind conjuring terrible scenarios about their fate. The hide flap of the teepee opened, allowing sunlight to stream in. A young Comanche woman entered, carrying a wooden bowl of something that smelled like corn porridge. She placed it before Sarah, whose hands had been untied sometime during the night while she slept. "My babies," Sarah said, meeting the woman's eyes. "Where are my children?" The young woman looked at Sarah with what might have been sympathy, but she didn't speak. She gestured for Sarah to eat, then turned to leave. "Wait," Sarah pleaded, reaching out to grasp the woman's buckskin dress. "Please, Emma. Elijah, my babies." The Comanche woman hesitated. "Babies safe," she said in halting English. "Chief's wife take." Sarah felt a surge of both relief and terror. They were alive, but in the hands of the woman who had struck her with such contempt. "Why? Why does she want them?" Sarah asked. The young woman shook her head. "Eat. You work soon." She departed, leaving Sarah alone with her bowl of porridge. Despite her worry, hunger won out, and Sarah ate quickly. She needed strength if she was to find her children and somehow escape this camp. As she ate, she took stock of her surroundings. The teepee was small but clean, with buffalo robes for bedding and a few clay pots in the corner. Nothing that could serve as a weapon or tool for escape. Shortly after finishing her meal, the hide flap opened again, and an older Comanche woman entered. Her face was weathered by the sun and years, with deep lines around her eyes and mouth. She gestured for Sarah to follow her. Outside, the village was alive with activity. Children played, women worked at tanning hides or preparing food, and men gathered in groups, discussing hunting or perhaps warfare. Sarah scanned the camp desperately, looking for any sign of her twins. The old woman led her to a shaded area where several women worked, scraping and stretching animal hides. With gestures and a few words Sarah didn't understand, the woman demonstrated what was expected of her. Sarah was handed a scraping tool made of bone and pointed to a freshly skinned buffalo hide pegged to the ground. As she worked, the sweat running down her face mixing with silent tears, Sarah continued to observe the camp. The chief's large teepee stood prominently in the center, adorned with painted symbols and eagle feathers. Several times she caught glimpses of the chief's wife moving about the camp, always with an air of authority that other women seemed to respect or fear. But there was no sign of Emma or Elijah. Were they in the chief's teepee? Were they being cared for properly? The questions tormented her as she mechanically scraped the hide, her hands soon blistered and raw from the unaccustomed labor. Midday came, and the women paused in their work to eat. Sarah was given dried meat and some kind of berry paste. She ate little, her stomach knotted with worry. As the others rested in the shade, Sarah noticed a small commotion near the chief's teepee. The chief himself had returned from what appeared to be a hunting expedition, several men behind him carrying a freshly killed deer. He was a tall, imposing figure, his chest bare except for a necklace of bear claws. His face was stern but not cruel as he dismounted and strode toward his dwelling. Sarah's heart leaped. If she could somehow appeal to him directly, perhaps he would show more mercy than his wife had. But as she rose to her feet, the old woman supervising her work caught her arm in a surprisingly strong grip, shaking her head in warning. "Chief," Sarah said, pointing, "I need to speak to the chief." About my children. The old woman's grip tightened. No. Bad idea. Her English, though limited, was clearer than the younger woman's had been. Chief's wife angry. You stay. Why is she angry with me? Sarah asked, desperate for any information. What have I done? The old woman studied Sarah's face for a long moment. She lost child. Moon ago, much pain in heart. Understanding dawned on Sarah with terrible clarity. The chief's wife had lost a child recently, and now she had taken Sarah's twins, perhaps to fill the void left by her own loss. But they're my children, Sarah whispered, the unfairness of it crushing her. I've lost everything else. Not them too. The old woman's face softened slightly. I am Stoneflower, she said, touching her chest. I help you maybe, but careful. Chief's wife, Running Deer, very powerful, very angry. Thank you, Sarah said, grasping the woman's weathered hands. I'm Sarah, Sarah Miller. Stoneflower nodded once, then turned back to the hides, indicating that Sarah should continue working. As she resumed her task, Sarah felt the smallest spark of hope ignite in her heart. She had found an ally, however tentative, in this strange and frightening place. As the sun began its descent, the women gathered their tools and the prepared hides. Stoneflower gestured for Sarah to help carry a stack of scraped skins to a teepee on the eastern edge of the camp. As they walked, Stoneflower spoke quietly. Chief is called Eagle Eye. Good man, fair, but love wife much, listen to her often. Will he let me see my children? Sarah asked. Stoneflower shrugged. Maybe. Running Deer keep babies in Chief's teepee. They cry much for mother's milk. Sarah's breasts ached at the mention, painfully full with milk her babies needed. They must be hungry. Please help me see them. After depositing the hides, Stoneflower led Sarah back toward her small teepee. As they passed near the central area of the camp, Sarah suddenly heard a sound that made her heart stop. The unmistakable wail of her son Elijah, followed by Emma's higher-pitched cry. Without thinking, Sarah broke away from Stoneflower and ran toward the sound. She reached the chief's teepee and pushed aside the flap, desperate to reach her children. Inside, the chief's wife, Running Deer, sat with both twins on a bed of furs. They were clean and dressed in small buckskin garments, but their faces were red from crying, their little arms reaching out as if searching for their mother. My babies! Sarah cried, rushing forward. Running Deer leapt to her feet, placing herself between Sarah and the twins. Her face contorted with rage as she shouted words Sarah couldn't understand. Behind Sarah, several people had gathered at the entrance of the teepee, drawn by the commotion. Please, Sarah begged, falling to her knees. They need their mother. They need milk. Running Deer stared down at her with cold eyes. She spoke sharply to someone behind Sarah, and rough hands grabbed her shoulders, beginning to drag her away from her children. No, Sarah fought against the grip. Emma, Elijah. Suddenly, a deep voice cut through the chaos. The hands holding Sarah froze, and everyone in the teepee fell silent. Sarah looked up to see the chief, Eagle Eye, standing in the entrance, his expression unreadable as he surveyed the scene before him. He spoke quietly but firmly to Running Deer, who responded with a torrent of angry words, gesturing at Sarah and then at the twins. The chief listened without interrupting, his gaze moving from his wife to the crying infants to Sarah's tear-streaked face. When Running Deer finished speaking, Eagle Eye was silent for a long moment. Then he looked directly at Sarah and spoke a single question in halting English. These your children? Yes, Sarah answered, her voice breaking. My twins. Please, they need their mother. Eagle Eye nodded slowly, then spoke again to his wife. Whatever he said caused Running Deer's face to darken with anger, but she did not argue further. With evident reluctance, she stepped aside, allowing Sarah to approach the twins. Sarah crawled forward and gathered Emma and Elijah in her arms, sobbing with relief as she held them close. They immediately quieted, recognizing their mother's scent and touch. Eagle Eye watched this reunion with an expression that Sarah couldn't quite read. Curiosity, perhaps, or something deeper. You feed, he said to Sarah, gesturing to her chest and then to the babies. Then they return to my wife. No, Sarah protested. They need to stay with me, please. Eagle Eye's expression hardened slightly. You, prisoner. Children stay with Running Deer. You come feed when sun rises, when sun middle, when sun sets. It wasn't what Sarah wanted, but it was better than complete separation. She nodded in acceptance, tears streaming down her face as she nursed her hungry children, aware of Running Deer's hostile gaze burning into her back. A week passed in this strange arrangement, with Sarah permitted to nurse her twins 3 times a day in the chief's teepee, under Running Deer's watchful and resentful eyes. The rest of her time was spent working alongside the other women, learning their ways out of necessity. Stoneflower had become something of a protector, teaching Sarah basic words in the Comanche language and explaining aspects of tribal life that might help her survive. Running Deer lost son, Stoneflower explained one afternoon as they worked side by side, grinding corn between flat stones. Baby sick die before moon changes. She blame herself. Thinks spirit's angry. I understand her grief, Sarah said softly, thinking of how devastating it would be to lose Emma or Elijah. But taking another mother's children isn't the answer. Stoneflower nodded sagely. She know this in heart, but pain make people do strange things. Sarah had noticed that despite Running Deer's possessiveness of the twins, the woman seemed increasingly frustrated by their continued crying and fussiness when separated from their mother. The babies would settle when Sarah nursed them, only to begin wailing again when she was forced to leave. On the 8th day of her captivity, as Sarah entered the chief's teepee for the midday feeding, she found Running Deer alone with the twins, looking exhausted and defeated. Emma was screaming inconsolably while Elijah whimpered, his face red from exertion. They no sleep, Running Deer said in broken English, surprising Sarah, who hadn't heard the woman speak her language before. Cry all night, want mother. Sarah approached cautiously and gathered her babies into her arms. They immediately began to quiet, their little bodies relaxing against her familiar warmth. They're very young, Sarah explained gently, sitting cross-legged on a buffalo robe to nurse them. Twins need their mother more than other babies. My grandmother was a twin, and she told me twins share a special bond with each other and their mother. Running Deer watched with a mixture of resentment and curiosity as the babies nursed contentedly. After a long silence, she spoke again. My son, Jumping Fox, he strong baby. Then sickness come. Her voice cracked slightly. I not strong enough to save. Sarah felt an unexpected wave of compassion for the woman who had struck her and taken her children. I'm sorry about your son. No mother should lose a child. Running Deer's eyes flashed. White men bring sickness to our people. Many children die. Not all white people wish harm to the Comanche, Sarah said carefully. My husband trades fairly with all people, and I would never want any child to suffer. Running Deer studied Sarah's face, searching for deception. Finding none, her shoulders slumped slightly. Eagle Eye say we not keep your babies forever. Say it wrong. Hope surged in Sarah's chest. Does that mean you'll let us go? No. Running Deer shook her head firmly. You still prisoner, but maybe. She hesitated, seeming to struggle with what she wanted to say. Maybe babies stay with mother at night. Better for all. It wasn't freedom, but it was an improvement that Sarah hadn't dared hope for. Thank you, she whispered, genuine gratitude in her voice. The twins will be calmer, and you'll be able to rest. Running Deer nodded curtly, then stood and left the teepee, leaving Sarah alone with her babies for the first time since their capture. Sarah held them close, whispering prayers of thanks and promises that somehow, someday, she would find a way for them to escape. That evening, Stoneflower helped Sarah prepare her small teepee for the twins, bringing additional buffalo robes for warmth and a special cradle board that could hold both babies securely. As Sarah settled the twins for the night, their little eyes already closing in contentment at being with their mother, Stoneflower lingered by the entrance. Running Deer changing, the old woman observed. She watch you with babies. See good mother. I hope so, Sarah replied, gently stroking Emma's fine blonde hair. I just want to keep my children safe. You learn our ways quick, Stoneflower continued. Work hard, no complain. Chief noticed this. Sarah looked up sharply. What do you mean? Stoneflower's weathered face crinkled in a slight smile. Eagle Eye watch everything in camp. See how you care for babies, how you work with women. He thinking much about white woman and twin babies. Before Sarah could ask more questions, Stoneflower departed, leaving her to wonder what the chief's thoughts might mean for their future. Could there be hope for release, or was she misinterpreting these small mercies? The next morning brought an unexpected development. As Sarah worked at scraping hides, Eagle Eye approached, causing the other women to lower their eyes respectfully. He stood before Sarah, his tall frame casting a shadow over her work. "You come," he said simply, gesturing for her to follow. Heart pounding, Sarah set aside her scraping tool and rose to her feet. The twins were sleeping in a cradleboard nearby, and she reached for them instinctively. "Babies stay," Eagle Eye said. "Safe with women, you come alone." Reluctantly, Sarah left her children in Stone Flower's watchful care.